My name is Kevin Callahan. I'm with the 8th Air Force Historical Society of Minnesota, and today is December 2nd, 2017. I'm here with Lou Langer and Harold Hansen for an interview with Lou. So I guess we'll get started. Lou, what's your full name?
Louis J. Langer.
How old does that make you?
92.
And where were you born?
Little town of Piers, Minnesota, P-I-E-R-Z.
Where's that located?
Near Little Falls.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about your parents? Was your father in the service or anything?
No.
Okay. What were their names?
Well, my father was Peter. My mother was Marie.
Did you then grow up in Piers?
I left there when I was 16.
And where did you move then?
St. Paul.
Could you tell me, do you have any siblings?
I have 4 children
Mm-hmm.
and 8 grandchildren.
Oh, okay.
And 5 great-grandchildren.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's excellent. Could you tell me a little bit about what schools you attended growing up?
Well, I attended elementary school in a small one-room country school. Let's see, one-room building with 8 grades in it and 1 teacher.
How did that work? I grew up in a public school that was enormous in size.
You know, looking back, I feel that worked wonderful. I think one grade learned from the other. We learned from each other. I'm kind of an example of that. There were only 4 in my class, and all 4 of us, we did quite well in our class, but then we were always listening to the class ahead of us, and all 4 of us skipped the 3rd grade.
Good grief! Wow, that's a great way to do it.
So we all ended up finishing elementary school in 7 years.
So how did one teacher handle this when they went through the day?
They had to be well organized.
I'll bet. Well, now, did you ever keep in touch with the other classmates if you only had 4 people in your elementary school?
I've seen them occasionally. They're all dead. One of them died quite young. 2 of them died quite young.
So then from elementary school, did you go to a middle school or junior high school or something like that?
I spent a couple of years in high school in Little Falls. And then my dad needed me on the farm, and then I spent some time on the farm, and I decided that farming wasn't for me, and I left and came to the big city.
So what kind of a farm did your dad have? Was it dairy or wheat or corn? Or?
Well, at that time it was a farm of, how do I describe it? It's existing farming. It's they raised what they needed to eat. We had a little of everything.
Wow, how many acres could you support a family with doing that?
Well, my dad had about 200 acres.
Okay. So you lived through the Great Depression. Do you have memories of the experience?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Well, tell me a little bit about what you remember.
Well, I remember that we couldn't buy the normal things that most people would be able to buy. And we ended up making our own cereal out of various grains that were in our sheds. We made coffee out of barley. We did those kind of things.
Sure.
And we even made our own beer.
Okay. Well, now you were pretty young for drinking beer, I suppose, at the time you were on the farm.
I probably started drinking beer when I was 5 years old.
Really? Okay. Well, you're here today, so it didn't hurt you any.
No.
So then, when you moved to St. Paul, what was did you have a job that you found? Or?
Oh, I had a job right away. I had various jobs. In fact, my first job was working for White Castle.
Really? Is the White Castle still here that you worked at?
No,
They tore it down.
it's gone, yeah. It was out on East 7th Street.
Did you have a particular experience that helped you to get into the aviation area in World War II? In other words, did you have like a hobby with planes, or how was it that you ended up with the Army Air Corps?
Well, there was a guy that did air shows, but also give air rides that landed on my dad's farm, and he was short of gas, and my dad said it was okay to give him some gas out of our gas supply for the tractor, so and then he gave me a ride in his airplane, and that just kind of turned me on. And so,
You got hooked with that experience.
well, that didn't really quite hook me, but it left a pretty good impression on my mind. And then when my draft number came up, I went up and talked to the guy at the draft board, and I asked him, what kind of programs that I could get into if I volunteered before my number came up. So we talked about it a bit, and he said, well, he says, we got a program that for the Army Air Corps, for pilot and bombardier, and it's a whole bunch of programs, but it's basically Army Air Corps cadet program. And I said, I could probably get you in there, but he says, did you graduate from high school? And I said, no. He says, you think you could pass a, what's that test they give you?
Oh, the aviation cadet test?
No, ACT.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh yeah, I think I could pass that. So he gave me the test. I passed it with flying colors, and I was in. So then I signed up and ended up going to Buckley Field, Colorado for basic training, and then on to cadet program at Missoula, Montana, University of Montana.
Okay, I'm going to take a break for just a moment so we can adjust the light. You went to Buckley Field for your basic training, and then Missoula, and that was that the beginning of your aviation cadet time?
Right.
And what were you studying to be? Were you going to be a pilot or navigator or
Well,
bombardier?
it was a program there, a cadet program, was not geared to any specific, like a pilot or a navigator or It was simply for the program.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we graduated from there, then we took a test, and some people went to the navigation program, some people went to the bombardier program. I ended up going to the pilot program.
Mm-hmm.
And I got shipped to Santa Ana, California.
So that's where you learned kind of the basic and primary basic and advanced?
Right, yeah.
Well, let's start with memory. There's a actual national holiday called Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, and the number of people who actually were alive and remember Pearl Harbor is getting smaller and smaller. Do you remember your experience of how you learned about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was still a kid on the farm at that time, and we heard it over a radio that we had. Obviously, TVs did not exist at that time, and we did have a radio that we watched news probably twice a day, or listened to news. They were battery operated because we didn't have electricity on the farm, so we had batteries that we had to get, like a car battery, we had to get them charged. And so we couldn't watch it too much or listen to it too much, let's put it that way.
Did you have a separate battery, or did you pull the battery out of the car to listen up to the radio?
We had a separate battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's your recollection? Did you know where Pearl Harbor was, or the significance of this event?
No, I did not know what Pearl Harbor was. We started learning more about what Pearl Harbor was as we listened to the news.
Sure, sure. Well, as a aviation cadet in your pilot training, what did they start you with?
Well, we started with a pre-flight program, and there basically we were taught about engines, engine performances, horsepower, basically the functions of various aircraft engines, and that's what it started with.
So you had a lot of schooling to know the kind of the theory of how to fly a plane and what was
Oh,
involved.
we had a lot of, yeah, oh yeah.
And then did you get to practice in a plane? Which one did you start with?
Well, the first airplane that I flew was a 60 horsepower Piper Cup.
How was that for an experience?
Well, we got you into the air, and it was an experience.
That had all the controls and everything was pretty much manual with a fixed landing gear.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well then, once you got your basic or primary Cub training at Santa Ana, did you go to the next level?
No. Before I finished the pre-flight program, our president announced that he was eliminating some of the pilot training programs because he had too many officers laying around in cocktail lounges.
Uh-huh.
And the squadron that I was in, and one other squadron, 2 squadrons got eliminated. The one that was behind me, us, and then our squadron, 2 squadrons got eliminated.
Yeah. So they were readjusting where the personnel was going because they had too many in one area.
Well, we had too many people laying in cocktail lounges,
Sure.
according to the president.
What year then are we at, or, about approximately?
We are in 1940, 44,
Okay.
early 44.
Can you tell me a little bit about Santa Ana? It sounded like a big base for training aviation people.
It was a big base, yeah. It was a big base. It was well laid out. I liked Santa Ana. In fact, I ended up, before I got out of the service, I ended up at Santa Ana again. But
Well, people sure moved around during the Second World War. You saw a lot of the country, actually, when you think about, how did you get around?
by train,
Were they regular passenger trains or a troop train, or?
they mostly troop trains, but a lot of the Air Corps people, we didn't have large enough numbers of people traveling. A lot of us rode on the regular passenger trains.
Was a troop train one of these ones that was left over from like World War I, or were they nice inside, or were they pretty primitive from not having been used for 20 years?
They weren't nice.
They weren't.
I had nothing to compare it with because I had never ridden in a train before, so
Sure.
They were pretty primitive, let's put it that way.
Is this in the days of steam, or did they have diesel trains?
All steam.
Okay, so
Still all steam.
the smoke would come out of the stack and go back into the.
Right over the top, and then of course no air conditioning, so hot weather, we had the windows all open and the black smoke had come in. you know
I
all
can
about
verify that.
You've been on a troop train, okay. Well, so your squadron gets sort of caught up in this reassignment decision,
Yeah.
and then did you finish some training at Santa Ana, or did they move you somewhere else, or?
Well, I ended up with an interview with a guy, and he wanted to have some idea of what I would like to do and what he might be able to get me to. And the first thing he says, would you like to go back into Army? I don't know, what would you call it?
Like a gunnery school or something?
Well, no, if I would, if the first thing he asked me if I want to go into, where you do a lot of walking,
Oh,
Infantry, huh?
infantry.
okay.
And I said, absolutely not. I said, that's why, he said, I think we got a couple of programs that we can probably get you into. How would you like to go and do an armament school? And he said, what's that? And he explained it to me, and I says, it just sounds great. So I was the only one out of the bunch that ended up going to armament school. From there were other places they came from, but Denver, Colorado, back to Denver again, where I went to, where I started out.
Well, tell me about armament school.
Well, armament school was very interesting. We were taught, first of all, the 50 caliber machine guns, and we had to be able to take those apart blindfolded and put them back together in a very short time time. But then we were also taught about turrets and the modern turrets that were just had come out in recent times. We had a ball turret that we were were taught. We had the, well, let's see, at that time they had the ball turret. Well, then the tail, they just had come up with a twin guns on a turret on a tail of various airplanes. But then also we got into arming bombs and putting the fuses into them and knowing how to set the fuses, knowing how to load them onto an airplane and keep these safety pins in them. We had actually doubled safety pins on all the bombs that got loaded onto the airplanes. And then after we got it assigned to an airplane, we were responsible for checking those safety pins before takeoff. That was part of the program.
How long was the training in armaments?
About 3 months.
Oh, it was that long? Okay. So you learned how to not only take them apart and fire them, I assume. Did they have a firing range?
Well, we had a firing range, but we didn't do much of that because from there we got sent to a gunnery school.
Okay, so you learned sort of the armaments and all the things about fusing the bombs and shooting, and then you went on to gunnery school?
Gunnery school.
Where was the gunnery school?
Gunnery school was at Kingman, Arizona. In the middle of the summer, 120 degrees almost daily. We did, we shot, I think we started out with shooting 12 gauge shotguns and shooting them from various positions and to various target zones that taught us how to lead. And then they put us on the back end of pickups, and then from a moving base to a moving target, we had that. We're taught how to do that. But from there, then we got assigned to crews, and that's when I got assigned to a B-17 crew at Alexandria, Louisiana. Alexandria Army Air Base.
Well, with the gunnery training, the truck's moving forward, and then somebody would like launch a clay pigeon in either direction, or how did that work? I imagine.
Well, there'd be targets coming out from various positions
Yeah.
as you drove by them.
Okay, so you could learn which way to lead and how much to lead, and
Yeah.
that's kind of a complicated mental thing to
Yeah.
figure out where to point the actual 12 gauge shotgun to hit the clay pigeon, especially if you're moving in one direction, and I suppose the clay pigeon could be going either direction.
Could be going either direction
Yeah.
depending on the
Yeah.
what they had set up for that. Yeah.
So at Alexandria, did you stay with that crew throughout your career?
Well, we got assigned to a crew there,
Mhm.
and we did operational training there. We did some practice bombing, and we had one overseas flight down to Havana, Cuba.
Did you land in Havana, or you turned around there, or?
Oh, yeah, they had a base set up there at that time. Havana was still, at that time, was still friendly with the U.S.
Yeah. What was your position, or what was your job?
Well, I was the armament gunner with the responsibility of the two-waist guns, but also responsibility of in case of malfunctions, I had to take care of the ball turret in the event a ball turret didn't work. I had to get the guy in the ball turret out, and then I also had the responsibility of watching the tail gunner to see whether his oxygen was up to. Basically, in charge of both those two people and the radio operator, and I was responsible for 3 people.
So, on a flight, would you be positioned at the waist?
I was positioned at the waist.
Were you on one side or the other, or did they switch you around, or how did that work?
Depending on our position in the formation.
Mhm.
The position and the formation determined whether I would be on the right side or the left side.
Can you tell me a little bit about those ball turrets? Were they reliable, as long as there wasn't battle damage? Did they turn and you didn't have to worry about the guy too much getting them in and out of the thing, or did they have mechanical glitches with those?
We never had, in my experience, never had a problem with them.
Yeah, so they were
They
reliable.
were pretty well developed.
Mhm.
I, on 2 occasions, had to fly the ball turret.
What was that like?
Well, that was like trying to get inside this chair and everything right over the top of you.
They look a little cramped for me.
Actually, they were pretty comfortable.
Okay.
You once got into it, they were pretty comfortable.
Mhm.
Because, you had your head had a good rest and your arms were laid into a position where all that you had were the triggers for the guns, and you could easily go to sleep. And
Because you're kind of reclined a little bit?
well, usually you rolled yourself back into a semi-sleeping position.
Yeah.
Until you got into combat, of course, then you rolled around and you watched for airplanes like everybody else was.
Yeah. Well, how well was the vision inside the ball turret?
And the ball turret?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you had pretty good vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how did you control this thing? Was there like some kind of a switch, or?
Just like you just moved. You had 2 deals that you put your hands on, and you had the trigger on that too. But then you could roll it, and you could bring it back, and it was well engineered.
Yeah.
A pretty well engineered deal.
Well, I imagine you guys had pretty good motor control in order to coordinate to lead a target with a remote control and get the guns.
Well, the ball turret was designed to do the leading for you.
Oh, how did that work?
Well, I don't know.
It was like a computerized thing.
It was the beginning of the computerized stuff, yeah. But it automatically, all you did is put your sight onto the target, and it took care of the leading.
Yeah. Wow, that was very sophisticated.
You know, the ball turret was that way, and the later tail turret was that way. The early tail turret was not that way.
You'd have to visually like sight the plane and lead it.
And then give it
Yeah.
a lead, yeah. And then, of course, you had your, every, the eighth shot, I think, was the,
Tracer,
what?
tracer.
Yeah, tracers.
Yeah.
So you'd watch your tracers, you know, you'd shoot off a few tracers and then get your lead down to where it should be.
Yeah. Well, they must have made a lot of advances if they got to the point where you could just look through the sight and then it calculated all the leading over the course of that war.
Say, the ones, I think it was the E model B-17, they had the advanced guns with the automatic lead on the tail and the ball,
Yeah.
not on the waist. The waist guns, you had a lead.
Now, when you started out with your crew assignment in Alexandria, did you start off on a B-17E or was it an earlier model? Or?
Oh, it was an earlier model. I
Okay.
forget the model, but number on, but.
Well, I think the F didn't have the front and the tail was different. And then they put a chin turret on the front, which was the G, and then E, F, G.
Yeah, I kind of forget them.
Yeah, there was a
numbers.
sequence there where they added a chin turret, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, where the
up in front.
where the bombardier and the well, the navigator had some guns up in front there. And,
So once you learned with your crew how to do kind of operational activities, were you in the States for a while and then you shipped out to service overseas?
well, then we got shipped back to. Not Omaha, Buckley, not Buckley. It was,
Somewhere in Kansas or?
no, in Nebraska. South of Omaha, Lincoln.
Okay, sure.
We got shipped to Lincoln, Nebraska, where then we got our assignment there. And they didn't have any aircraft to fly over it, and they shipped us to the East Coast. We got onto a convoy of
Like a transport, like a Liberty ship or something?
Liberty.
Wow.
We had over 50 small boats, and the boat that we were on just had the basic crew for the ship. It was a Kaiser Liberty ship. We all became gunners on there. They had a gunnery trainer on there, and they trained us all for guns on that thing.
So you were defending the ship?
And we had to run the ship. We could go down to the galley and get our food whenever we wanted to. But we spent 29 days on that boat.
Wow, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
Did you ever get seasick or?
I didn't, but quite a few of the guys did. I was lucky. I never really got seasick.
That must vary a lot between people if they get like air sick or seasick. I'm very susceptible to that. Even 2 hours on a boat and I'll get sick. But I've had people tell me they never got air sick or seasick. So
I never got air sick either.
yeah. Well, you went into the right service then, I think. Well, what was it like to be, why was it that long to cross the ocean?
I don't know, we gotta ask somebody other than me.
Did they
It's,
do,
these are like, I think we were dodging German submarines all over the South Atlantic, and we ended up. First thing that when we saw land, we saw the Rock of Gibraltar. That's the first land that we saw. And then we knew that we were going to Europe. Before that, we thought we were probably going down around South America and heading because we're under so long. We had no idea where we were going.
they didn't tell you what,
Oh,
what
no,
the, oh, okay.
No idea. But then when we got into the Mediterranean, well, we knew we were either going to Italy or going to someplace. But we ended up in Marseille, France.
Was this, you said there were 50 ships in the convoy?
Yeah, 52, I think it was.
That's a pretty
Big convoy.
And a lot of these were people that were transporting, and I suppose supplies went with the ships. And all
Well,
that.
the ship we were on, down in the hold, it was loaded with 50 gallon drums of 100 octane gas and various bombs that were used by the Air Corps.
So you were like on a floating bomb for 28
We
days.
were, it was not a comfortable feeling.
I can imagine, or I can't really imagine. Yeah, you wouldn't have wanted to have been hit by a torpedo in a boat full
That's
of
for sure.
airplane fuel and bombs. Did it transport, planes and jeeps or anything like
No.
that? Or?
Well, not on the ship I was on.
Yeah, you're more transport.
We really never got to see much of the other ships. We were
Yeah.
just one small boat in a big convoy.
So when you reached Marseille, what time of the year, or what year was this? This was after they had landed, I assume, and taken the
Yeah.
southern France
It was
coast.
early, very, well, it was right after the first of the year,
So the 45?
45.
Okay. Did you debark or get off the ship at Marseille, or did you go on?
We got off the ship in Marseille, and actually we spent 10 days there. And it was what they called a repo depot. And then we got onto a French merchant ship run by French people, not military, and then we took off and went from there to Marrakech, North Africa.
Oh, okay. You're seeing the world at this point. You've been in
We're-
Europe and Africa in a short
Well,
period.
And then from Marrakech, North Africa, we went to Naples, Italy.
By the way, what did you mean by a repo depot? What is that reference to?
Repo depot. Repo depot was, I don't know what that really meant, but then later on I found out that a friend of mine was working at that repo depot at that same time, which I didn't know at that time. And what they did is that they shipped a lot of supplies into that place that then got shipped up into France for the invasion. That's where a lot of the gasoline went to and a lot of that stuff.
So it was supporting the Third Army and all those people that were.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So from Naples then, excuse me, what's that? No, that was. From Naples, did you travel to your base?
Naples, and we immediately got transported to the marshalling yards or railroad, and we were, well, we got onto what they call the 40 and 8s.
What is that?
Well, the 40 and 8s, they were box cars that hauled 40 people or 8 mules, and that's how it got its designation. And we only had the old-fashioned he-bills in there to sit on. We didn't have any benches or anything. And we had, I think we had three crews of 9 men in each boxcar. We had a total of 9 B-17 crews on that Kaiser Liberty boat.
Sure.
And then we all got onto boxcars, and we got shipped to various bomb squadrons, so we didn't all end up at the same bomb squadron.
Sure. What, did you go to immediately to an airfield?
Well, we went to Naples, and they picked us up in trucks. We got into the back end of open trucks, and they took us out to the 301st Bomb Group, 353rd Bomb Squadron, where we then met the CO of that base, a guy by the name of Colonel Holmes.
Holmes. And then this is 15th Air Force?
15th Air Force.
Where was the 301st located? What part of Italy?
Well, it was near Foggia,
Okay.
but we were south of Foggia near a little village called Cernola. Don't ask me how to spell it, I don't know.
Sure. So the airfield, how were you housed when you got there?
We were all in tents.
Okay, what, these big green
Officers,
canvas?
everything, everybody was in tents.
Mhm.
And the field was built in the farm field, steel mats, they flew off of steel mats, and we didn't have any regular runways at all.
Were you there in the winter?
Oh yeah, they were there winter and summer, yeah.
Was it, I know you're in Italy, but was it cold? Did it get cold there?
Yeah, when we got there, it was getting pretty cold at night. We had sleeping bags, on our cots, and
Any way to heat the tent?
we found a way to figure out how.
It did.
Yeah, we did.
You came up with improvised your own heating system or something?
Built. Well, somebody told us how to do it, and they gave us the equipment. 50-gallon drum where we had a helmet that we turned upside down and filled it with sand. And then we had a copper tube running from, up in a tree along the side of the tent. We had a drop tank off of I think off of P-51s, drop tanks.
Mhm.
That we got filled with 100 octane gas. And we had a tube that ran down and about this high above the sand would just drip drops of 100 octane down into that sand, and then it would vaporize and you get a beautiful blue flame.
Well, it sounds creative but dangerous. So, 100 octane aviation fuel is extremely flammable and explosive,
Yes, it
isn't
is.
it? So you never blew yourselves up or?
There were a few fires there.
Okay.
But that's how we heated the tents. But then as the spring came on and got warm, then we just needed them.
Yeah. So, once you got to, Churdanola? Churdanola, near Foggia, you started your actual missions?
That's then where we started training.
Yeah.
We had some training there. Well, first of all, we got assigned to an airplane, and then we had various training programs for various people in it, and the pilots then had to fly. And they had I forget what you call it, had to do various things to the airplane.
Did you have like experienced people that were filling you in on what to expect when you went into enemy territory?
Oh yes, yeah. And during that process we had our navigator who he didn't mix with anybody. He didn't seem to like anybody. And he got over there, and unbeknownst to our crew, he volunteered to fly with any crew where they were short a navigator. He wanted to get his missions in as fast as he could. So before we were ready to fly missions, he had volunteered to go on a trip, or not a trip, but on a run, I guess. And they got shot down and he got killed. So that was a kind of a frightening experience for us.
You really knew you were in a combat
We
zone.
knew
You could get
we
killed.
were in a combat
It
zone.
was serious what you're involved with.
It was serious, yeah.
How big was this airfield in terms of size?
Well, I think it must have been close to a square mile. It was pretty long. It was great farming country. In fact, I had the occasion to go and visit it after I got out of the service. I went back there, and it was an interesting day.
Your crew, did it stay together as a group other than losing the navigator throughout your mission?
Well, we got assigned another navigator, and then, yes, most of the time we flew as a crew.
Yeah. And what was your pilot's name?
Herschel Nelson. He was from a little town in South Dakota. In fact, the name of the town was God, I even forget that.
Small town in South Dakota?
What?
It was a small town in South Dakota?
Yeah, it was close to the Minnesota border.
Well, there's a lot of them, but Sioux Falls is the biggest maybe.
Well, no, this was north of Sioux Falls.
Okay.
Yeah, north of Sioux Falls. Close to the Minnesota border. His dad had a little restaurant there in the town, and boy, I forget the name of it. I even went out there and hunted with the pilot, and I became good friends. And I think that because Minnesota and South Dakota being that close together.
You were both Midwesterners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So him and I became good friends, and I was also a pretty good friend of the co-pilot. His name was Max Holmes, and Max was from oh boy, mine is not working right now. He was from Des Moines, Iowa. His dad had a car agency there. He had a Chrysler agency there, and he went into that business when he got out.
Well, you have a pretty good memory for the details of other people's lives, considering it's over 70 years ago that you knew them. Did you have other people that that you got to know then? I assume you knew everybody at the time.
Well, I knew I knew the tail gunner quite well. Him and I were really pretty close friends. We did things together, and then of course the ball turret gunner. He was from Michigan.
What was the tail gunner's name, if you remember?
Tail gunner? That was, yeah, I know his name.
Well, I'm sure that when we get the crew list, you know, post that.
He actually was born and raised in Europe. We flew over his hometown one day, and he recognized it. He saw the school there where he went to school, and we flew right over.
Really? Was this in Italy or Germany or something?
No, this was in Germany. Well, not in Germany. It was one of the.
Well, they kind of took over Austria and what would be then Czechoslovakia. And,
Yeah, it was Yugoslavia.
oh, Yugoslavia, sure.
Yeah.
Now, when then did you start your missions where you were actually flying into?
Well, it was, I think, early February of 45.
Okay. And the war ended, I think, May 8th.
Yeah,
So how many missions did you fly?
19.
And could you tell me where you would fly? What the target areas would be?
Well, most of them were in Eastern Germany, Austria, and a lot of them were in Austria. And we did get one mission we called a mop-up in that big oil refinery in
Ploesti?
Ploesti. Yeah.
Okay.
We had one mission into Ploesti.
Well, that's a lot of combat missions. I don't know where to start. Do you have any particular memory of the first one, or how these went in sequence, or?
You know, I don't have any specific memory of any of them except one, and that was maybe a coincidence or whatever. On my birthday, March 1945, I was over Berlin. And we just got beat up so bad that day. I remember that one pretty good.
What was the thing that would beat up an airplane? The flak, you mean, or fighter pilots, or?
Well, we had two things. We had, over Berlin, you could expect to get extreme flak. We had, first of all, the mission was too far for us, so we couldn't get up to the altitude that we normally flew. We got up to about, I think, 22 or 24,000, and we normally flew 31 to 33,000 most of the time. And it just changed the effectiveness of the anti-aircraft so much lower altitudes, and the anti-aircraft was extremely effective over Berlin. But then also, the first time and the only time we got hit by the Me-262s, the very early models.
That's the jet?
That's a jet,
First
German jet.
First operational jet in aviation history, I think.
Yeah, yeah, we got hit by those.
Did you see him in your position where you were?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
Oh, yes. We saw them and we recognized them, and they were probably a mile and a half above and behind us, and they were sitting up there, and I don't know who called it out. I think it was the flight engineer. He had a good view up there, and he called it out, and then we all saw him, and then all of a sudden they made passes at the squadrons, and they were determined to get the lead crew, and they did. They got 3 of them in a row, and that put us into the lead position, and well, it ended up where I think our squadron started out with, 24 airplanes, and we ended up with 18.
Wow, you lost 6. That's a lot of percentage of for one mission.
Well, a little higher than normal, you know.
Yeah. Well, was a 262 something you had ever seen before? Or?
No, never. We had seen in training. We had seen pictures of them.
Sure.
We knew what they were when we saw them.
They had enough.
And they were the
briefing,
early model that took off on stationary wheels, and as they got up to flying speed, they just rotated and the wheels dropped away, and they came back and landed in grass. Jacked them up, put them on the wheels again.
Huh.
Yeah, but they had not come up yet with at that time, with a good wheel system on them.
So compared to, did you see before this? Had you seen Messerschmitts and?
Oh yeah, we
Fokkers
saw the
or-
ME. Oh yeah, we saw the Messerschmitt.
Yeah.
We saw mostly. Mostly, Messerschmitts.
How did it compare with this new plane?
Well,
the speed, maneuverability.
the speed was so fast in the Me-262s that we just couldn't get our sights on it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when they once came in, they were so fast, we just couldn't get our sights on them.
Were they attacking from the rear or the front or the side?
They were coming from, well, from my position, they were, well, if I was in the airplane looking this way, they came from my high right and coming right on down
Mm-hmm.
past the squadron.
Yeah. Well, our sun has moved a little bit. I'm gonna adjust our screen if I can. Maybe, if we could pull the table forward just a little bit, it'll get this light on your face.
Oh.
How's that for you?
That's all right by me.
Okay.
How's the time working out, Lou? Are you, do you have to?
We
be
can take a
someplace?
break anytime.
Do you have to be someplace? I'd see it's a lot.
No, I've got another half hour.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, that must have been a memorable birthday for you.
Sure was.
Well, you were flying lower and the flak, I imagine it was less distance for the flak to come up and get to your formation. How big are formations were these that you would
I
fly
think
in?
that they, I really don't know exact my count, but I would suspect we probably got about 200 total.
Yeah. And your targets on your missions, I imagine, were all over the place in Europe at that time?
Well, oh yeah, but from where we were with the 301st Bomb Group, we had Pacific targets with that, as that group.
Mm-hmm.
I was with the 301st Bomb Group and the 353rd Bomb Squadron.
Can you tell me what you would do with regard to the bomb loading and what you had to do?
Well, I only checked what they had done. I never loaded anything. I checked the safety pins. That's what I checked.
Yeah. Were there was a safety system once the bomb left?
All right, but then when we got close to the target, I had to go up into the bomb bay, walk up into the bomb bay, and there were like cotter keys alongside of the other long safety rod. We pulled the cotter keys. Well, now the bombs were able to be armed. They were still not armed. They were not armed until they dropped off out of the airplane. Because as the bomb dropped out of the airplane, there was a long piece of steel wire, about that long, that had also right parallel with the cotter key. It also put the bomb into a safe position as long as it was an airplane. But as it dropped out, then the bomb fell away from the pin, and then the propeller started spinning, and it had to spin so many rotations before the bomb was actually armed.
Mm-hmm.
It armed itself after it had come out of the airplane.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good system. Was this like 500-pound bombs or 1,000-pound bombs or napalm or what? Do you remember what?
It depended on the target, and I don't remember what we did on Germany. I think we had some 500s in Germany, but I don't remember the briefing and as to what the actual target was. I knew it was Berlin, but I can't remember what in Berlin that.
Sure. Well, you said the lead plane was shot down when 3 of them went after that, and then your plane had to take over the lead position?
Well, when you're in formation, you have one lead guy, and then if he gets shot down, there's another guy from within that formation has to slide up into that position. Well, 2 of the lead guys got shot down, besides others, and we were in the lead position by the time that we had dropped our bombs.
Mhm. Well, did you know the people in the other planes in your squadron, or?
No, I had no idea who they were.
Were you assigned to a particular plane, or did you kind of rotate into different airplanes as a crew?
Oh, I guess earlier in the history of the bomb group, most guys had their own airplane, but we just simply got assigned an airplane
Sure.
that day.
Do you remember the names of any of the planes? I know some planes, but not all of them had like nose art, and they went by kind of cute names. Or,
You know, I don't.
Yeah, you were more rotating around.
We
into
were
different
rotating
planes.
around,
Sure.
and I don't remember the names of the planes.
Did you, well, you said you had a lot of damage that day.
Oh, yeah.
What would the damage be to an airplane?
Well,
getting hit by?
we had some big holes in the wings, just next to the fuel tanks. We had probably 5 feet away from me, there was a big hole through that was almost big enough to jump out through after we came back. But those were where a shell moved through it but had not exploded yet, and the shell exploded up beyond the airplane, you see. If it had exploded in the airplane, it would have been the end of the airplane.
Yeah. So it kind of went through the airplane.
Went through the airplane and ripped,
Wow.
just ripped big holes as it went through.
Wow. And this was 5 feet away from where you were standing.
Yeah.
So I imagine that must have been a big shock and sound and.
Well, we were so young and so dumb that it became fun, you know.
Well,
There's something to talk about.
now I've seen pictures with the oxygen, and you had a heated suit on, and I mean this wasn't a pressurized airplane.
Oh, no.
I suppose in a way it probably was good if you had shells going right through the body of the airplane. You wouldn't have a rapid depressurization or anything.
Well, yeah, well, we didn't have any pressurization. It didn't make any difference.
Did it affect your oxygen supply, or?
No. Well, if it had hit a
Yeah.
line, then it would have, but in this case, it did not do that.
Yeah.
No.
So you didn't lose anybody like the ball turret guy that day,
No.
or? Okay.
No.
Did you lose crew members during the time you were in service there that were on your plane?
Only one. That was when I was flying with another crew. And it was the radio operator we lost that day.
The flak or,
anti-aircraft.
yeah.
By the time that we got over there, the Air Corps had destroyed the fuel supply so bad that we didn't have a lot of fighter, other than on a couple of occasions, and one was in Berlin, and the other one was in Pulaski, and I forget what the other one was, but at the end we didn't have anything.
So they were still hitting Ploesti in 1945.
Well,
to cut
we had to hit it because they were constantly rebuilding their system of making, what do you call
the
it?
refineries?
Refinery,
Yeah, yeah.
So, they called it a mop-up, and, I don't know, it's,
Well, Ploesti, that was often a different angle from Berlin,
oh,
so.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
What was
way,
the-
way different. This was way out east, right across the Mediterranean, not Mediterranean, what was
Adriatic.
that body of water there?
Is it Adriatic and
But
the Adriatic Sea?
Adriatic, right,
Yeah.
yeah. We basically went straight across the Adriatic, I would say at maybe about 80 degrees to go to Pulaski.
Mm-hmm. What was that like to fly over the Ploesti refinery complex? It was just another
Like
mission?
flying anyplace
Okay.
else. You go where you're told to go.
Yeah. So your squadron actually had kind of a lot of losses doing these missions, if you lost that percentage on one single mission. Do you have any idea over the course of the time, how many people are in your squadron, how many planes? It sounded like you had a pretty high loss rate.
Well, I've read a lot about the 15th Air Force and the 8th Air Force and about their percentages of loss, and early on the 8th had very high loss ratio. What was it? I think up around 7%.
Yeah, it was
Per
quite high,
mission.
yeah.
But I think down in Italy, the latter part there, I think we were down around 5%. But that's still, every time you go out, you lose a few,
Yeah. Well, the other thing about the 15th is you're flying over the Alps. Didn't you get like extra credits on the missions because you were crossing this mountain thing twice?
No. No,
How many missions did they say you had to complete in order to go home?
25.
25. Well, you came pretty close if you did 19, and then the war ended.
They didn't think that we did that many, or, well, they knew how many we did, but we got shipped back shortly after the war was over there, and we went back and flew a B-17 back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And got a 30-day delay en route, and reported back into Santa Ana, California, and then we got assigned to a B-29 crew. And we're waiting for shipping orders, and the war ended.
So the bomb ended the war, and you didn't have to get
Right. Yeah.
time in over Japan.
Yeah, I would say that we probably would have been over there or on the way over there within a week after the bomb was dropped there, we would have been over there.
Yeah.
Because we had already been frozen to the base, we couldn't leave the base. And, so they must have had some ideas where and when we were gonna leave, and I have no idea where, when we would have went, other than we were gonna ship South Pacific.
So you had training on B-29s as well, and knew.
Well, we didn't get any training yet, but we were gonna get, they have a name for it when you get your training from one aircraft to another.
Mhm.
I forget the words they use, but we were gonna get that in the South Pacific when we got there.
So some kind of a transitional
It was
training
a
program.
transitional training.
Yeah. Well, I imagine you were glad that the war ended when it did then.
No, I was kind of looking forward to getting on the B-29.
Yeah. Well, that would have been quite a different airplane, pressurized and really high and fast and big and.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would have been very different.
Did you go on any flights? Did you have a chance to do by B-29
Never got
flights?
into one.
Yeah.
Never got into it on B-29.
Was the 30-day delay en route, was that you could go home, or what was that?
Well, wherever we wanted to go home, I did stop at the farm for a couple of days.
Mhm.
And, but then I had a sister that lived in St. Paul, and I spent quite a bit of time with her. You're ready to go, huh? Well, we should be done by 11:30.
Yeah, well, we'll just do a little thing on your post-war career and
Okay.
we'll be done shortly.
Take your time.
Did you ever get any leave when you were in Italy?
No.
So you were there at the base the whole time? Did they ever let you off the base to go into town or anything?
Oh, anytime we were not flying, we could go into,
And what was the closest town, Foggia?
Foggia.
Okay. What was Foggia like? Is it a small town or big town or?
It was a town probably the size of, well, maybe the size of Woodbury, or,
Oh, okay.
it was not a real big place.
Yeah. So you didn't have much entertainment or USO or any of that sort of thing there?
No,
Never met Bob Hope and
never met
all
any
those
of them.
people? Okay. Did you keep in touch with any of the people on your plane later?
I kept in touch with Hirsch Nelson, a pilot. I saw the co-pilot a few times. We did see each other on with the tail gunner and the ball turret gunner and the flight engineer. We saw each other probably half a dozen times. They're all dead now,
Mhm.
but we had a little reunion here about 10 years ago, and we all got together.
Oh, that must have been fun and interesting.
It was.
Yeah.
It was an interesting, we had 3 days together. It was an interesting 3 days.
Where was the reunion?
A little town in Indiana, where the tail gunner lived there. A tail gunner's son put on the deal.
Mhm. Did you keep any documents, letters, photos, or anything like that? After?
Nope.
Okay.
I never looked back in my life.
Yeah.
I made it a policy. I look forward and I never look back.
Yeah. And that's why you're here at 92. That must have worked well. Well, So after you returned and the war ended, were you discharged quickly then, or how long were you in
No,
service?
I got back to Lincoln, Nebraska, and because of they put you in categories based on the length of time. I think I'll spend about 3 months in Lincoln before I got. But I got to know the captain pretty well, and I asked him if there's something I could help with, and he asked me if I could set up a place where the guy waiting to be discharged could do hobby things, and I set up a place for him to do that, and he gave me the authority to requisition whatever that I needed. I ended up with bandsaws, and I ended up with table saws, and I ended up with all the kind of stuff you guys use, you know. And I had guys that made some pretty interesting things.
So it got you interested in construction, and you're already started, and you hadn't even gotten
Oh,
out.
I already had that in my head, you know.
So when you were discharged, was it at Lincoln or
I
somewhere
got
else?
discharged in Lincoln.
And then what did you do after the war? I understand you were in the construction field for.
Well, my goal in life was to be a industrial arts teacher, and I went to the University of Minnesota, and they said that it would end up being almost a year before I could get in. They had such a backlog, so I had to do something, and I ran into a friend of my sister's husband who owned a body shop, or he wanted to own a body shop, and he was working for a big body shop downtown, and he wanted to build one, and but he couldn't find any lumber anyplace, and he asked me if I could see if I could find some lumber for him, and I started driving around southern Wisconsin, and I found 2 lumber mills where they sawed their own lumber, and where I could get enough lumber. I came back and told him, and he says, well, I said, I'll pay you for your time. He says, if you can arrange to get, I rented a truck, and I hauled the lumber back from Wisconsin for him. And then he had hired a carpenter, and he said, would you like to work with this carpenter? And well, I did, and I just kind of fell in love with construction. And 6 months later, well, after we had finished that building for him, I just started my own company.
So I imagine there must have been a big boom after everybody got out of the service.
There was so much work. It's just like today. It's very similar to today.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to go out and decide to do something in the construction field, and if you had any idea how to do it, you could find the work to do it. You just had to have the ambition to do it.
Everybody was coming home to get married and have a career and get a house. And...
Oh, I was not ready to get married.
How did you meet your wife? Or when?
Well, I met my first wife about 2 years after I came home, but we dated off and on for 3 years before we got married. So I didn't get married until 1950. Got my first wife, and then had a nice family, and but by that time my business was pretty well established.
Well, I think you've had a long career in the construction field. When did you retire from it?
Well, I retired at age 70.
So you went the full career
Yeah.
there. And you met Harold here during the time you were had some projects. You've done each other 50 years, did you say?
I think the first job we did was at Volkswagen garage for Archie McDonald.
Oh, for Archie, yeah. That was kind of early on in my career.
Yeah, that was at least 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, that's a long time. That's a good. Your old friends are your best friends, I guess.
It's
Well, I did want to ask you what you remember about the end of the war. How did you hear about the war ending?
well, we heard about. See, it was really two. We heard late in the evening about the surrender of Germany, and of course then everybody went out and got drunk and all the dumb things that you do when that happens, and they went and got all the things that you shoot off
Oh, flare guns?
flare guns out of the airplanes and shot them up in the air.
So VE Day was like the 4th of July with the flare
Right.
guns going off.
Right, yeah.
Everybody's probably pretty happy. And then you were in the United States when you heard about the VJ Day in the Pacific.
Yeah, see, that's when shortly after I got back to the States, where I was in Santa Ana, California, and waiting for shipment to the South Pacific. Okinawa is where we were assigned to go. Okinawa.
So people were celebrating, imagine when the VJ Day was announced, that it was all over finally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did they let you off base, or were they concerned you?
We just left. The guards let anybody go out at Santa Ana. I ended up, I had a sister living in Los Angeles, and I ended up hitchhiking there, and then we celebrated with them and a bunch of other people, and I think about 3 o'clock in the morning, well, I used my brother-in-law's car, and at 3 o'clock in the morning I got back to the base with his car, and I parked it outside the barracks. And next day then I drove back into LA and brought his car back and hitchhiked back out to the base again.
Have you ever been on one of those honor flights that go out, take the veterans out to Washington to see
Yes.
When did you go, and what was that like?
I can't remember exactly when. It was about 5 years ago that I went. I had been on similar things in my life, and I was not too impressed with it, but
It sounds like a long day. You're getting up early and you get back.
they
late.
did a nice job.
Yeah.
I think the nicest part of what they did is when you came back, and when they had that mail call.
Mail call. Okay, I've never been on one, of course. I'm not
Yeah. Well, they had like a simulated milk hall, and I think that was one of the most interesting things of the whole thing.
People would write a letter to you, or?
Well, friends, yeah, and they had that all set up. I didn't know anything about it. My family, and they did a nice job, and I think they're still doing it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I want to end on time. It's about 11:30. Was there any other things you would like to have me ask or go over that you can think of?
Well, I just have had a great life. My sons have taken over my business. They're both doing a good job. In fact, I just had somebody call me, and we talked on the phone, and he was commenting on it, how fortunate I was to end up having my two sons take over. I had various businesses besides the construction business. I had a real estate development company, and my second son took that over, and my first son took over the construction business. They're both doing well.
That's great, yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you, and I want to, of course, thank you for your service. You know, without us
You're
winning
welcome.
World War II, where would we be? We'd be all under the thumb of a bunch of Nazis or something, so.
Kind of sounds like you might have a little bit of first-hand knowledge of it yourself.
Well, my dad was an aviation cadet, and he didn't talk much about it, so I got interested in it, but, you know, he passed away pretty relatively young. I don't know.
Well, then, I'll tell you that aviation cadet program was a very, very interesting program to me. It's, you know, they teach you how to eat the square meal, and oh, I mean, there's so much I could go on and on talk about that program, but it taught me a lot. Let's put it this way.
Well, you got to see the world, all the places you went to, and all the planes you got. The classics of World War II are the B-17 and the B-29, which you were about to go into. So
I believe my experiences in the service was a very, very good experience to help me through life. I don't think that I would have ever done what I did in my lifetime had I not been in the service. The service taught me how to think, it taught me how to, what is the word I'm trying to think of? It's,
Teaches you a discipline too.
what?
A discipline.
Well, that's part of it. The discipline is what taught me, you know, that it's,
you knew how to work. You know, you'd done a job. You'd already had a career in a sense before you got out to work
you know,
as a civilian.
that was not a problem, but it's, no, I think the experience of being in the service and the experiences of being into combat, I think, helped me a lot through life. It's,
I would imagine it's a maturing experience to realize you might not get through your birthday compared to, you know, young people today. Maybe they go to college or something, but they don't go through the experience of that kind of travel and bonding in a group and going through surviving dangerous situations, and then having the responsibility once you got out, you know, to do the family responsibilities. So, yeah, I could see that, that would really have a more maturing influence on a young person than maybe the experiences people today go through, unless they're in the military.
well, I think right to start out with the cadet program is a tremendous program, I think, that we should have a lot more of our young people go through a program similar.
Well, you did, I didn't ask this, but you did continue on and we're flying, is that right? You
Oh,
had-
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got I don't know, if you got a few minutes, I might be able to show you some, the airplanes that I've had and,
Sure.
while you put that equipment away, I'll go and bring some of it out if I can.
Excellent, well, let's do that.
All right. And my good friend here, he's experienced flying with me in some of them.
And he's still here to
Yeah,
tell
still
the
here.
tale.
And he's
Why
still
doesn't-
here.